Welcome, everybody. It is great to be with all of you here in Annapolis, and it's a great day for all Marylanders and all of us who love the Chesapeake Bay and the Bay watershed. All of us here know that the Chesapeake Bay is a natural wonder. It's also an important part of Maryland's history, this region's history. It's part of our identity. It's also a driver of economic opportunity. And today, we're taking a very big step forward toward preserving the Bay for future generations, to telling the story of its heritage and role in American history, to support those who make their livelihood from the Chesapeake Bay, and to create more public access so the Bay and its bounty can be enjoyed by all. I'm really pleased to be joined here today by many, many Bay champions. First of all, I have to say that Senator Cardin was not able to join us here. He's on his way back from the climate summit in Cairo, but I think all of you know that both through his role on the Environment and Public Works Committee and his longtime support for the Bay, he has been a true champion. So I want to thank him and acknowledge all his efforts. I'm also joined here today by my colleague and friend, John Sarbanes, who's been a partner in producing and pulling together the legislation that we're going to begin to talk about, the draft of which we're going to be introducing today, and I want to thank John. To the county executive, Stuart Pittman, thank you for all your leadership. We're obviously watching closely the returns, but I just want to thank you for your leadership. Mayor Buckley, thank you very much as well. We're here in the historic and beautiful city of Annapolis. And I want to thank you for all that you've done. Sarah Elfreth, Senator from this area, who's also, she's double-hatted. She not only represents this area in the Senate, but she is the chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. I want to thank her. Joel Dunn with the Chesapeake Conservancy, who's been just a nonstop driver in this effort. Thank you, Joel. Vince Leggett from Blacks on the Chesapeake, who has opened our eyes to a greater part of the Bay history. Johnny Shockley from Blue Oyster, who has been one of the great innovators in terms of aquaculture and the bounty of the Bay. And we're also joined here by many others, but let me first ask all of you to give those folks who you're going to hear from a round of applause. And I want to thank them all. I also want to take a moment to thank Delegate Jones, who's been part of our advisory team, as well as the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, the Brandywine Foundation, the National Parks Conservation Association, the Maryland League of Conservation Voters, to Wendy O'Sullivan, who is the director of the National Park Service for the Bay. She was an ex officio member of the working group. And of course to Ann Swanson, who's been such a key part of the Bay history. We're also joined by Dr. Boyd, I believe. Is Dr. Boyd here, who heads up, thank you, who heads up the Chesapeake Bay program. Thank you for joining us. And I also just want to thank all the other members of the working group. As you'll learn, for those of you who have not been part of it, and I know many of you have been a part of it, this has been a long and productive process that brings us to this day, and I want to thank everybody who's been part of that team. We've been working together with John Sarbanes and myself to try to put together this proposal to create the National Recreation Area designation for the Chesapeake Bay region. In other words, to create the National Chesapeake Recreation Area. That is our goal. That is what we're all organized around. And I want to just say a couple words about why we think that's important. Number one, it will unlock more opportunities and more federal resources for the Chesapeake Bay area. The National Park Service will have an even bigger role here, and that will also help tell our story to America. And in doing so, bring people from all over the world and all over the country here to better appreciate the Bay and its heritage and its beauty. The idea is not new. It has been around for a while. In fact, it started with an op-ed in the Capital Gazette in the 1980s and championed by former Anne Arundel County Executive Jim Lighthizer and former Senator Paul Sarbanes. When I was elected to the Senate, we began to talk about this idea with Joel and many, many others. And we also received support from Maryland Governor Hogan in the form of a letter, as well as former Virginia Governor Northam, who was governor at the time we really launched this process. They both sent letters of support for this effort. Congressman Sarbanes and I then pulled together the Chesapeake National Recreation Area Working Group, members of whom I referenced earlier, and many more. So it includes lawmakers from both houses of Congress, including many of our Virginia colleagues who are very excited about this as well. 30 regional organizations, from environmental and historic preservation organizations to environmental justice group to our watermen. And in collaboration with the working group, Congressman Sarbanes and I partnered with the National Park Service, with the Department of Interior, with the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee, to begin to produce the discussion draft that we're releasing today for our Chesapeake National Recreation Area proposal. We are releasing that discussion draft today, and that is the reason for our gathering. And before I turn it over to John Sarbanes, I just want to make a couple points, 5 specifically. Number 1, a unified designation will ensure that national recognition of the Chesapeake Bay. I don't know about all of you, but our family, many times when we're an outdoor family, when we're looking for a family vacation destination, we look at the national national parks around the country. This will literally put the Chesapeake Bay area on the map as a national park and that designation. It's going to highlight the Bay's culture by telling the stories of indigenous people, women, freed and enslaved black people, the role of the Chesapeake Bay in the early days of the Maryland and Virginia colonies, and the role the Bay has played in our regional economy. And all of that is important because the Bay history is American history. A unified designation will also reinvest in the Chesapeake Gateways program, which is a long-standing educational and community engagement program in the Bay watershed. 4th, a unified designation will generate more jobs and opportunities in the region for all those who make their livelihood from the Chesapeake Bay, from the watermen to tourism to the boating industry and others. And 5th, a unified designation will open more parts of the Bay to the public, which is a big win for all of our communities, especially those who have traditionally lacked access to the Bay. Over 90% of the Chesapeake Bay shoreline is privately owned. We need to make sure that the public has access in the points that we can provide access. So that's what this will do. Very quickly, I want to tell you what it will not do, because we don't want anybody to have any misinformation about what this does. It will not impact water rights. It will not impact fishing rights. It won't supersede state regulations on fishing and wildlife management. It won't supersede state regulations on commercial water business. And it won't require the participation of any parties or landowners who are not interested. It is all on a voluntary basis. We are releasing this discussion draft for a 90-day public comment. This is the next step in the process. It's not the end of the process. Once we get input over the 90 days on the discussion draft, Congressman Sarbanes and I, along with Senator Cardin and our colleagues from Virginia, intend to introduce the bill after receiving public comment, and that will kick off the legislative process in the United States House and the United States Senate. Thank all of you who got us to this point. It's been a journey. We've come a long way. We have a long way still to go. And I want to thank and introduce and bring up my partner from the House in that effort, John Sarbanes.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks very much, Senator Cardin. This is a very exciting day. The Senator referenced my father's early work to try to lift up the Chesapeake Bay in so many different ways over the years. And he really, I think, felt good about the handoff that happened with with Chris Van Hollen in terms of Chris stepping up into a similar kind of role. So, Senator, thank you so much for that. So creating this unified Chesapeake National Recreation Area, the CNRA, as we refer to it in shorthand as a unit of the National Park System, is a huge step forward for the Chesapeake Bay. And that's why we're so excited to be here with all the partners, the advocates. If you look at the working group that was referenced, this is really a who's who of Bay champions and advocates who over the last couple of years have been coming together on a regular basis to make sure that they were translating the broad perspective on what this National Recreation Area could be into the legislation that we're releasing today in draft form. We all know here that the Chesapeake Bay is a natural treasure and is a national treasure. And having the opportunity for the Park Service to create a unit that lifts up the bay is something we didn't want to miss, and that's why we've been working on it so deliberately. In addition to thanking Senator Van Hollen, I also want to give special thanks to his staff who've been working on this, and to my staff as well. It's been a good team partnership effort, but they're the ones that have done a lot of the hard work, bringing the working group together on a regular basis. I also want to salute, as the Senator did, Senator Cardin for his leadership at the state level, other members of the Senate, including from Virginia, Senators Kane and Warner, my House colleagues who've stepped up behind this effort on a bipartisan basis, Bobby Scott from Virginia, Lane Luria from Virginia, and Rob Whitman from Virginia, who've been active participants in the working group. Of course, to our fellow electeds here, Stuart Pittman, the county executive, to Gavin Buckley, the mayor of this beautiful city of Annapolis, to Senator Sarah Elford. These are conservationists through and through. They understand the power of what we are proposing here today, and they've been partners along the way. To Joel Dunn, who I'll introduce in a moment, Ann Swanson, Vince Leggett, Johnny Shockley, so many others who have been part of this for a very, very long time. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. This is building, as we've alluded to, on other efforts, in particular the Gateways program, which is coming in shortly to its 25th anniversary over the next couple of years, and has identified hundreds of sites through the Chesapeake Bay watershed of significance to kind of lift them up. But what we're going to have with the CNRA, with this National Recreation Area, a unit of the Park Service, is the opportunity for kind of mutual reinforcement between the Gateways program and the National Recreation Area. And what that'll do is it will just elevate the appreciation, the kind of collective consciousness about the Bay to the next level, to the level where it needs to be. And that historical significance, cultural significance, economic, and so forth, all the things that Senator Van Hollen mentioned, those will be pushed to the fore, again, in the collective mind of people in this state, in this region, and in this country, because again, the Chesapeake Bay is a national treasure. The process of gathering up perspective, as you heard, has been a very deliberate and steady one over the last couple years. It's been very transparent, it's been very open, it's been collaborative, and I think that's why we've gotten to this place of real opportunity. And we do want to bring more federal resources to bear, not just through the ability of the park system to assume some management responsibility, but by creating a permanent authorization of the Gateways program. Again, those things can work in tandem. This comment period that we're embarking on for 90 days is just, an extension of the collaboration I mentioned a moment ago. And we really are hoping to get as much input from the public as we possibly can to finalize the language of this bill, the draft that is being released today. This is for everyone. This is for everyone who cares about this national treasure, the Chesapeake Bay. We want the establishing legislation to reflect the stories, the perspectives, the lived experiences of Bay communities, as diverse as the ecosystems in the Chesapeake itself. From those who make their living on the water, to those who enjoy recreational opportunities across its landscapes, to those who are dedicated to restoring its ecosystems. Everyone should have access to the Chesapeake Bay, and with the Chesapeake National Recreation Area, we can help make this a reality. So we're here today at one of the sites, one of the initial anchor sites that we see as comprising this Chesapeake National Recreation Area, and with the input that we envision coming forward, we can build on that moving forward. So again, thank you all for being here. You're the ones that helped lift this up. Congratulations on the contribution you've made to the Chesapeake National Recreation Area. Now it's my pleasure to introduce somebody who's very shy and retiring. You know, the thing about Joel is if you're walking down the street, you can see him coming out of your peripheral vision. Am I right? Like this. And you know he's going to catch you at some point. He's going to want to lock you in on one thing or another. But you need, I was saying to him before, you need someone who is relentless and persistent, who has a sense of vision, where they want to take things, and absolutely commits themselves every single day to pushing forward with that particular project. And certainly Joel Dunn with the Chesapeake Conservancy. He's done that in so many ways that have benefited the Chesapeake Bay. Yeah. This is another example of how he's making a difference to lift up this national and natural treasure. So, Joel, let me turn it over to you.
Wow. Thank you, Congressman Sarbanes, and thank you, Senator Van Hollen. Thank you, all my friends who are with me on stage here today. This is a big moment for the Chesapeake Bay. As Congressman Sarbanes and Senator Van Hollen said, this is an idea whose time has come. You know, I was jogging across the Chesapeake Bay Bridge yesterday as a part of the Bay Bridge Run with Candace by my side, who runs the EPA Bay program. And I was listening to Frank Sinatra sing, "The best is yet to come." And I was thinking, and here we are, you know, the best is yet to come. This is one element of that. People have had this idea for over 30 years, and it's really been a part of the fabric of the effort to protect and restore the Bay. And now it's coming into fruition. The idea is just let's create a national park that helps people access the Bay. Create a park that allows visitors to experience the wonders and the magic of the Chesapeake Bay and engenders a sense of appreciation so that they fight to protect it. So maybe they'll commit their career to protecting it, or they'll donate to it, or they'll vote for it. The Chesapeake, I want to say, is as spectacular as Yellowstone or Yosemite. It's as great as the Great Smoky Mountains. It's as grand as the Grand Tetons. And yet, we do not have a unit of the national park system devoted to the Chesapeake Bay's grandeur and magic. And we're going to change that. So I wanted to highlight that Senator Paul Sarbanes had that vision as well, and we're carrying forth that vision to bring that to fruition with this proposal. And from the beginning, the Chesapeake Conservancy has focused on expanding access to the Bay for everybody, to celebrate our diverse cultures and our diverse biodiversity, to celebrate those beautiful places and get inspired by the Chesapeake Bay, to change people's minds, to show them new colors. I really think that's something that everybody can get behind. In fact, we ran a public opinion poll in July of this year that showed there's profound support for National Park Service in the Chesapeake. 83% of respondents in Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. supported the establishment of a Chesapeake National Recreation Area, which is a pretty high percentage these days. And the other thing I want to say about this is a 21st century national park. Imagine a park that includes anchor sites in Annapolis and down at Fort Monroe, that celebrates our history, brings us all together, supports tourism, outdoor recreation, and really enhances the Chesapeake conservation and restoration movement. It's about celebrating our cultural diversity and biological diversity. So the release of this draft legislation is very significant, and we want to get everybody involved. We want to ensure that this legislation, when it's introduced, really reflects the values, priorities, and vision of the Chesapeake Bay, celebrates them, does not hinder them, and will establish a national park. This is a major endeavor, guys. We need everybody to pitch in. I'm so glad you guys are all here. I'm very appreciative of your support. Individuals, organizations, donors. I see a lot of staff members from the Chesapeake Conservancy here. Woo! Okay, so we have outstanding legislative leaders on this. We have the support of our community, our local leaders, County Executive Pittman, Senator Elfreth, Mayor Buckley. This is a vision for the Chesapeake Bay that will endure. And most importantly, we have you. You know, we have a big and diverse group of supporters for this idea all across the Chesapeake Bay. A whole coalition of people that support this vision. So with that, I'm going to conclude my remarks. I'm going to introduce my friend, Vince Leggett, who's going to tell us why he supports this idea. But before I do that, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for contributing. Thank you for supporting this idea. We need you. This is the start of a race here. We've got a lot more to go to get this done. But with you guys together, with us, we can get this done. It'll be great. Vince, please come on up.
Thank you, Joel. Again, my name is Vince Leggett. I'm the founding president of the Blacks of the Chesapeake, and I see many people on the dais and in the audience that began this walk nearly 35, 40 years ago, and I say thank you. The passage and implementation of this legislative initiative sponsored by Senator Van Hollen, Representative John Sarbanes, and the Maryland delegation is a sea change and constitutes a bellwether moment in our Chesapeake Bay region. The passage of this legislation will allow us to produce a string of pearls of Black African American sites around the Chesapeake Bay, celebrating people, places, and things that heretofore have been underreported or erased. This gives us the opportunity to advance so many voices that have been in the shadows. I truly believe that in order to really turn the Bay around, the quality of the Bay, the water quality of the Bay, we need to have all stakeholders at the table. So often, minorities, African Americans, and other underserved people look at this Chesapeake Bay as a playground for the rich, and many times they feel alienated from this body of water. What I say is collectively, let's reach inside of the beltways, the Baltimores, the Washington, D.C. beltways, and get all stakeholders at the table, because collectively we can make a difference. I think that the improvement of the water quality is something that we can do together, and we can do it celebrating our rich history and culture. I really want to also implement and highlight the recent project that we have done rescuing the Cars Elktonia Beach from the developers. The men and women that we have standing here worked hand in hand and heart in heart to make that happen. And what I would say is it is a classic case study of what can happen working collectively together. And for all, I say thank you. And now I'd like to reach across the bay to my friend Johnny Shockley and invite him to the podium to close the deal.
Thank you all for being here on this splendid day. It's absolutely beautiful, and it should be for this great announcement that's being made here. In case you guys haven't heard yet, I'm a third-generation waterman from Hooper's Island, and I'm very glad to be here. And if you hear my lingo, it is that we're ancestors to those who settled this bay and this state. A huge part of the waterman community are just that, ancestors of the original settlers who came here to find a bountiful bay full of oysters and crabs and nothing but opportunity in front of them. and use that opportunity to help build the economy and the establishment of the communities up and down this bay. I feel that we've gone through a 200-year revolution, and that my folks, the watermen, it's time for them to be celebrated as being part of the next 200 years and beyond of the restoration of the Chesapeake Bay by way of their practices and their knowledge of that bay. We need these folks as the new Navy of the Chesapeake in the endeavors going forth, using the science and the technologies and practices and everything that we're at to this day and time to build an infrastructure around oyster and the oyster restoration to be the example of the world on how to do this economic and environmental recovery. Thank you for Chris and John and everyone else who started this and give us the opportunity and this stage to work from. I look so forward to the opportunity. And thank you for the environmental community, along with my commercial community. And I'd just like to say, let's make the waters of the Chesapeake Bay run purple. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Vince. Thank you, Joel. Now let me bring up some of the other key players who are part of this effort. And as you can see, and as you know, in addition to the watermen, in addition to bringing the cultural stories to bear, we have elected officials from all branches of government, all levels of government, federal level, and now we're going to hear from our leaders at the state, county, and then city of Annapolis level, starting with Sarah Elfreth. And again, I want to thank her for her leadership as a state senator on these issues, but also as chairman of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. Sarah?
Well, good afternoon. I was scheduled to be on vacation for this press conference, but when Senator Van Hollen called me on Thursday, I knew I had to come back for the beach because this is quite a moment. So I'm a neighbor, first and foremost. I live just down the street. So having a national park right here in the heart of Annapolis, in the heart of a neighborhood that once reflected the diversity and strength of the city of Annapolis, and the ability to tell that story right here at the city dock for hundreds of thousands of visitors who visit every single year is an incredible opportunity that we just cannot pass up. I also serve as the state senator for this district, so piecing together some funding opportunities to save the Burtis House and keep it in public hands and for public use is a priority for our General Assembly. And of course, as chair of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, I can tell you that access, public water access, is a priority not just for Maryland legislators, but for legislators in Virginia and Pennsylvania as well. In fact, all three of our states in this last legislative session put historic funding behind expanding opportunities for public water access at our state parks throughout the watershed. But this moment right here, to bring in our national partners, to bring in more federal funding, to have, as Vince said, a string of pearls telling the key stories of our entire watershed is an opportunity we cannot pass up. I'll just end by saying our efforts to protect and preserve this Chesapeake Bay will not be possible, cannot be possible, unless we engender love and support from the public. And we cannot do that unless we were actively, persistently, doggedly providing greater access to this wonderful bay I have right behind me. So that's why this bill, that's why this federal partnership is so important. We have a lot of work to do, and I'm grateful to be here today and grateful to get started. Thank you.
Anne Arundel County Executive Stuart Pittman, and this took a while before this finally happened. And when things happen in Congress or don't happen in Congress, we expect them to be slow. But I don't think the rest of the journey for this bill is going to be so slow. Democrats and Republicans love the Chesapeake Bay. It doesn't matter what party you're in. And so I think that bodes well for this bill. But as the county executive of this county, I can tell you how important and what a great opportunity this is. We have 530 miles of coast, and we have been desperately looking for more ways to make more of that coast open to the public. Most of it is privately owned. And we couldn't have done Quiet Waters Retreat without some federal help. We couldn't have done a lot of the locations that we have. We know how hard our people fight for places like Greenberry Point, right? We are not going to let them take water access away from us. And now we're talking about Whitehall, just across the river, and we've talked about other locations as well, and there are other opportunities. So once we have this bill passed and we have this structure created, and we can say, well, it is going to be part of this national park, this national system, it's going to make it easier to preserve some of those places. And if we don't allow our people, our young people, our school children, our older people, people at every walk of life to experience the Chesapeake Bay, actually get out on it and learn to love it, then they won't fight for it. And that's why we're doing this, and that's why we're going to win and pass this bill. And we have Mayor Buckley.
Well, welcome to Annapolis, the historic gateway to the Chesapeake Bay, the body of water that brought me here on my boat. If any of you hadn't heard the $200 in my pocket story, if you could give me just a second to brag on where you're standing. Imagine where you're standing 6 or 7 feet higher. Imagine this beauty over here, reinvigorated with a national park banner on front of it. You can go in and learn the history of this amazing body of water that we're so lucky to live on. Please, before you leave, go and see the new Waterman's mural that we put on the back of that building up there. Get a photo taken next to it. After that, you can head up to Senator Sarah Elfra's house. There's a 6th door on the left. She'll get a cup of tea for you. And today's event is an example of what happens when everyone gets around the same table. A consensus agreement and then a plan. My favorite Uncle Larry says, in this world there are 2 types of people, doers and complainers. And I'm happy to be standing with a bunch of doers right here behind me. So these are people that make things happen, and it wouldn't happen without everybody here. At the local level, we ask businesses, residents, visitors, and government agencies to help us figure out a path forward. For today's announcement, it's clear that the team working on the Chesapeake National Recreation Area has worked with a variety of stakeholders. Sometimes these groups are all competing for the same resources and grants. Today, we see them coming together to create what will become a unified recreation area managed by the National Park Service. Thanks to Senator Van Hollen and Cardin and Representative Sarbanes for spearheading this effort, but also thank you to all the stakeholders who have come together. The Chesapeake National Recreation Area will rival similar recreation areas managed by the National Park Service across the country, including the Golden Gate in California. I remember when Wendy came to my office 3 or 4 years ago, and I said, "You had me at Golden Gate." You know? Boston Harbor, Islands in Massachusetts, Bighorn Canyon in Montana, Wyoming. In Annapolis, we welcome this partnership and the resources and experience that the Park Service brings to both conservation of these assets and the visitor experience. Together, federal, state, and local governments, as well as non-government organizations, non-profit partners, and the volunteer organization that serve as caretakers are working towards a common goal. It was an idea discussed in the 1980s, studied in the early 2000s, and coming to fruition today. Our piece, the Burtis House, where you are standing, will play a key role in Annapolis's contribution to that effort. Historic Burtis was a surplus to the city by the state of Maryland in 2022. And I thank Governor Larry Hogan, former State Treasurer Nancy Kopp, and Comptroller Peter Francho for recognizing the role this cornerstone property will play in the redevelopment of City Dock and our resilience efforts. The next step is to rehabilitate this building. We have established a partnership with the Park Service to move that effort forward. Burtis will play a key role in connecting the assets of the gateway. Burtis House can be a departure point for tours to Thomas Point Lighthouse, to Elktonia Cars Beach, or other locations in this beautiful watershed. Greenberry Point. And Greenberry Point. And the Chesapeake Bay Bridge, the new one that you got. When we get out on the water, it strengthens our connection to the Chesapeake Bay. When we are connected, We understand that long-term investment is necessary to conserve and protect things. We thank our partners here for that investment, and we thank all of you for all the contributions, because I know you all had a hand in this, and I'm so proud to be the Mayor of Annapolis and be part of this story. Thank you all.
Thank you, Gavin, and it is a very exciting day. And thank you all for bringing us to this point. Before we answer any questions folks have, Congressman Sarbanes, myself, or anybody here, I do want to just make a couple of acknowledgments. Berta's house obviously is a very important site. Whitehall was also mentioned, and I want to recognize Charlie Scarlett, who's a member of the family that owns Whitehall. Thank you for being here. It is one of those sites, as you see when those maps are released, that is going to be part of this effort. I also want to acknowledge, John mentioned earlier, as I wrapped up, I want to acknowledge all the members of the staff teams that have been such a part of this. I see one of my members of my staff when I was here in Annapolis, Marshall Verpluga, thank you for being here. And I see Charlie Steck, who used to work for Senator Sarbanes. It's an idea of the continuity of all of us bringing it here today. I want to thank collectively my entire staff, because they worked extremely hard in this entire effort, and Congressman Sarbanes' staff as well. So if we can give all of that team. I have a member here, but I especially want to mention Shelby Prettyman, who's right here, who came in as this was ongoing, but Shelby jumped right in and took it over and has made it her a passion and a project. So thank you very much, Shelby. John, happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Yeah, real quick, since we're doing the staff thing, Leela Duman over here, who's my person on the working group. And I want to reiterate what I said before. My father would be extremely proud of the step we're taking forward, and particularly proud, I think, of Senator Van Hollen's leadership. They're very much in the same style of you listen carefully to people, you respect people, you bring communities together, you build consensus, and Senator Van Hollen has certainly done that. Charlie knows that that's how my father operated. That's the way Charlie operated. He was the wizard behind all of those efforts over many years. But that's a tradition that Senator Van Hollen is carrying forward. So thank you again, Senator, for that.
Thank you, John, and thank you for picking up the mantle on this. It's been great to partner with you. Do we have any questions for anybody? Yes.
Yeah, I just want to hear a little more about the anchor sites you guys have mentioned throughout. How are those selected, and what's going to change for those sites if this legislation moves forward? Are they now partially managed by the National Park Service? Where do we go from here?
Right. So, and I'm going to get you a map so you can have all the sites. It's part of what we're releasing today. And some of them the National Park Service has an association with now. Others they would be authorized to acquire as a result of this legislation. As I indicated, empowering them to acquire these sites is done on a voluntary basis, and we've mentioned a couple sites already today, including Whitehall and other sites that we envision being part of this. We also set up a group, sort of a steering committee, that would, over time, recommend new sites that might be acquired by the National Park Service as part of this effort. The string of pearls analogy is a really good one.
So is this the way it works out? It's like Chesapeake Bay National Parks, sort of like the way you have that forested man, it's Arcadia, things like that. How does that work? Is that sort of the simplified version? Is Chesapeake National Park someday, or?
Yes, it's going to be called the National Chesapeake Recreation Area, and it is obviously that puts it within the National Park Service framework. It's under the unified umbrella. Unlike a Yellowstone, which is every square inch of that whole territory is National Park Service land. Here we are stitching together different parts of land that will come under the umbrella of the National Park Service. And then when you take it as a whole, it will tell the story of the Chesapeake Bay, which will in turn, I think, build a greater appreciation, not just in Maryland, but around the country, about why we want to preserve the Bay, and also bring people here from all over to appreciate its history, and as they do that, create economic opportunities for those who make a livelihood off of the Bay.
And when people hear recreation area, obviously in the most literal sense, they think about, you know, kayaks sailing on the water here. But like, how does, I guess, what opens up for more people that don't necessarily have simple access out of their backyard to the water?
Sure. Well, I mean, the National Park Service will, we hope and expect, will create opportunities for people to have that access to the Bay through the sites that they're going to be operating. So if they operate a certain site, they can also have recreation opportunities for the public from those sites. So it is a big part of this is opening up the Bay to greater public access, enjoyment, and appreciation.
And it's those acre sites you were talking about, the sort of just that dot around the region that they would sort of manage. That would be like the extent of their management, I guess.
So it would begin with the core sites that we'll provide you here that have been identified, but there is opportunity for it to grow. I mean, the National Park Service, we will empower them through this legislation to purchase additional sites to be part of the National Chesapeake Recreation Area. They'll be able to do that. The sites that we have on the map right now are the initial sites that we envision being part of it. Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure people understand there's precedent for this. If you look around the country, I think there's 17 or 18 other national recreation areas that are units of the National Park Service. A good analogy is there's the Boston Harbor Island National Recreation Area, which I think has about 30 different sites over time that have been added to that National Recreation Area. So we're starting here with 4 sites. What's great about these 4 sites, by the way, is each of them has their own distinct, powerful story to tell. So it's a great place to start in terms of demonstrating what the power of the Chesapeake Bay is. And you know, anyone who's here today is here in part because Chesapeake Bay is like part of your DNA. I mean, I grew up going down to Salisbury and fishing and crabbing on the Nanticoke River because my grandmother lived in Salisbury. That's where my father grew up. It was in me from a young age. We just want to lift that up and express it at a kind of more elevated level, and that's what the National Recreation Area gives us the opportunity to do.
Can you guys talk a little bit about the interplay between this and the existing Chesapeake Gateways network that is already kind of around? Will we see some sites that are potentially part of both? Like, how will that kind of work?
Well, the idea is that the Gateways program will be sort of folded in to this overall effort, and that it will also be authorized on a permanent basis. So that would fall within the umbrella of this effort.
And I mean, they're a little bit different. Gateways, what Gateways has done is helped identify sites of significance, but they're not part of a national park or a national recreation area. This is actually finding sites that will be lifted up and, as the senator said, sort of connected with each other conceptually to be a unit of the National Park Service. But they're very mutually reinforcing. You want a strong Gateways program, which has already demonstrated real success over the last almost 25 years. And now you're adding into the mix as another pillar of elevating the Bay, this Chesapeake National Recreation Area, and making sure that there's good funding for Gateways and that the Park Service has this opportunity to manage a new National Recreation Area will ensure, I think, going forward, that we keep the Chesapeake Bay strong and keep that focus where we want it to be.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, and thank you.